Now, before I go any further, before I forget, if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, it'd be much appreciated. It's free to do, and it's just a nice thing to do, so I would appreciate that. Let's talk about a more serious topic, and that's Giannis Antetokoumpo. Now, before the start of the season, everyone made it clear that Giannis was not to be awarded another MVP. By pretty much no circumstances would Giannis win a back-to-back-to-back MVP trophy because, well, he hadn't won a championship. Basically, that was their reasoning. Like, forget about him being the clear standout for the MVP trophy 2 years in a row, particularly last year. Like, it wasn't even close. I know LeBron came for the media members, and since then, they've been trying to hype him up. Oh, LeBron's going to win the MVP this year at 36 years of age. And they're trying to rectify that because they don't want LeBron breathing fire down them. But he was the clear choice. Best record in the NBA, best two-way player in the NBA during the regular season. Like, what else do you want? If you want to change the criteria, well, we'll talk about that in a bit. But if you want to do that, well, then maybe he's not the clear choice. But going off the criteria you have set, he was the clear choice. But heading into this season, apparently he just cannot win an MVP because he didn't win a championship. That's pretty much the reasoning. Voters fatigue, no championship. Like, what is voters fatigue anyway? Can we just talk about that quickly? Voters fatigue. So you're aware that you don't want to give him the MVP because you're assuming you're going to be fatigued, even though you talked about this last season. Are you understanding what I'm saying? It's like, oh, I'm assuming I'm going to be fatigued at this point, even though I can predict it and I could stop that if I wanted to. It's not like you're running a marathon. Like, what are you actually getting fatigued from? You're fatigued from seeing someone be the clear standout for an award. You're fatigued from being right. I know his name's quite long, so maybe you had to look up Antetokoumpo twice, 3 times in 3 years now. Maybe that's too hard. Your wrist is fatigued from writing his name out. What is voters fatigue? Like, you're aware of it, so I don't quite understand. You're not running a marathon. You're not joining the SAS. This is filling out a ballot paper. 1, 2, 3. That's it. Voters fatigue. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So, voters fatigue is why Giannis isn't going to win MVP. There, you've heard it, folks. That's pretty much all I've got to say. No MVP for Giannis because people don't want to put 1 under his name. But anyways, enough about the voters fatigue. Getting back to why he can't win an MVP outside of that is because, he didn't win the championship. He didn't make it to the finals in the playoffs. So if we're going off everyone who hasn't won a championship that has won an MVP, or everyone who's lost in the playoffs that has won an MVP, who's left? Who can we actually award it to this season? Trae Young? You want to give it to Trae Young? Because he hasn't lost a playoff game. Zion Williamson? Like, who do you want to give it to? I don't quite understand. LeBron James won 3 MVPs before he won a championship. Giannis has won 2. It's happened before. It will continue to happen because plenty of players win MVPs and not championships. Not necessarily is it Giannis's fault that he's come up against the eventual champions and the eventual finalists and's been knocked out, particularly when one of those occasions, both of those occasions, Eric Bledsoe was throwing up absolute bricks. And if we're just going to rule out people for struggling in the playoffs, what about Joel Embiid when he averaged 17 points a game to go along with 4 turnovers on 37% efficiency against the Toronto Raptors? Does that wipe him out of MVP conversation, or is his name not fatigued for these writers enough for him to be out of the equation? Just trying to understand the criteria. You see what I mean? I'm trying to understand the criteria about Giannis not being able to be awarded the MVP trophy because that's what everyone is saying. He just can't be awarded the trophy. It just can't happen. It just won't happen because he didn't win a championship, because he's won it before. Okay, with this being said, let's reset the criteria because as I understand right now, I don't know if I've got this particularly right, but I'd say the MVP goes to the most valuable player. That's one thing, but he goes to someone that helps his team and performs at a consistently elite level throughout the whole season. Ideally, the most consistently and the most elite level of all levels throughout the season, hence the most valuable player in the regular season. If you want to change that criteria to say he has to have won a championship before, or he couldn't get knocked out in the playoffs, he can't have a suit that's blue and wear that on a Wednesday, he can't get his coffee done a certain way. If that's the criteria that we want to change it to, that's fine. Just let's make it clear because I'm not quite too sure. I'm not quite clear on why Giannis isn't in an MVP conversation. That's what I'm trying to say right now. Why is Giannis Antetokoumpo not getting MVP talk? Do I think he's the lead away MVP right now? No. I think he's probably somewhere in that 3 to 4 range with a lot of other players, but the numbers he's been putting up, which we're going to talk about in just a bit, have been fantastic. The team's not that many wins behind a lot of other teams because it's not like anyone is doing overwhelmingly well to the point where, oh, he's a record of 19-13. It's drastic. It's terrible. He's not in the conversation. No team is doing that well. So he's in the conversation from that standpoint, and from a numbers standpoint, from an impact standpoint, he's still just as good as he was the last 2 years, apart from he won it the last 2 years, so he can't win it again. It's just dumb. It's just silly, and I thought I'd talk about it. But now that I've made my kind of case clear as to why I think it's silly that Giannis isn't in the MVP conversation, because that's exactly what he is. People have said that he's not going to win it because of voters fatigue, because everything I've mentioned, we don't need to get back into that. But what is he actually doing for me to be convinced that he should be in the top 3 to 5 MVP conversation? Well, I mean, he's doing kind of what he's done the last 2 years, where he's been a clear runaway MVP winner. So that's pretty good basketball from Giannis. Maybe he's not playing at the exact kind of elite level, and the Bucks certainly aren't, because they haven't been as good or nowhere near as dominant, but he's still playing really well. And I mean, just over the last 10 games, look at the numbers he's putting up. He's leading the league in scoring over that period of time. He's averaging nearly 33 points a game, second in the league in rebounding. And most importantly, actually, he's hitting nearly 75% of his free throws after struggling really bad to start the season. He's actually picked that up. Now, do the free throws matter when it comes to MVP? No. That could be another criteria you can add in if you don't want Giannis to win the MVP. Can't hit 70% of his free throws. Like, add in whatever you want to stop him from winning the MVP. Does that matter? No. But what matters is the fact that on the season, he's averaging 29, 12, and 6. Recently, he's picked that up to 33 points a game to go along with the assists and the rebounds that he continues to do. He's still an elite two-way player, still one of the better defenders in the league. Not at the same level he was, obviously Defensive Player of the Year last year. The Bucks system is a bit different. Teams are attacking them in a different way, so he's not quite as effective the way he was last year or the year before. But he's still an elite defender. Getting back to the impact, MVP, as I mentioned, well, you've got a number of players that are probably ahead of him in most people's minds. You have the Currys, the Jokic's, the Embiid's, and the LeBrons, and then people will throw in Dame. I've seen Donovan Mitchell probably get more mention than Giannis. Donovan Mitchell? Yeah, I repeated myself a few times because Donovan Mitchell more than Giannis? I'm sorry. He's on a good team, but can this stop? That is currently third in the East. They're only a few games behind LeBron and the Lakers. They're a few games ahead of the Nuggets, who have Jokic, the Warriors, who have Curry, and they're a couple of games behind the 76ers, who have Joel Embiid. So by every metric, by the stats, by the impact, by the wins, you would suggest Giannis would be right in the conversation for an MVP award. But when you look at the MVP trackers, people just consistently making videos or talking about who's the MVP. Have you heard anyone talk about Giannis? Let's be honest. Have you heard anyone talk about Giannis apart from me right now? I don't think you have. If you have, well then I guess you have, but I haven't, and I'm continuing to see people say he just can't win it because of voters fatigue. I'm not going to say voters fatigue again, but that is still the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, and I'm not going to get over that. In terms of him as a player, I mean, he hasn't really changed that much. Does he have to? Like, he's still an MVP 2 years in a row, so he's a pretty good player, it's fair to say. His mid-range shot is actually worse than it was last year, which is quite disappointing. He's still continuing to take him. He's trying a few different moves I've seen, but like, his mid-range shot is struggling. His free throws, as I mentioned, have picked up, so maybe that can have a flow-on effect to the point where he's shooting better from mid-range and better from three, but at the moment, it's been a struggle from there. One thing that I've noticed is he seems to be a bit better as a passer, just making the right decision more frequently when he gets double teamed or when the defense collapses on him. He consistently finds an open shooter. I mean, he's always been able to do it, but it just seems like he's just a notch ahead of what he was last year or the years before. The Bucks are actually incorporating him in that pick and roll game like we saw in late game situations the last couple of games against the Pelicans. We saw that pick and roll with Chris Middleton and Giannis. There's just a few things different, but it's not much different. It's still a 2 times MVP playing like a 2 times MVP, except elevating his performance over the last 10 or so games to the point where you've got to take some kind of note of someone putting up 33 and 13 a game on 57% shooting. That's not normal numbers. Those are numbers of an MVP winner and someone who should be in the conversation, not just kind of an honorable mention. And then I wanted to touch on his playoff performances just to kind of add some perspective, because I know some people think that he's been a playoff choker. Has he lived up to what he did in the regular season in the playoffs? No. But at the same time, has he been a choker? No. Like, I mean, he's averaged 25, 12, and 5 over the last 2 years. Obviously, there's more nuance to that, but at 24 and 25, that's how old he was during those 2 series. I'd say that's pretty good. Like, that gets overlooked, how young he was because of how good he was, but he was young. And when you look at his struggles, he came up against the Toronto Raptors. As I mentioned, Joel Embiid got absolutely clamped against that exact team in the playoffs in the exact season, and no one's talking about that, but people continue to talk about how Giannis has struggled against a wall. Well, so did Embiid. We've already seen Embiid get clamped by the Raptors this season as well, so he seems to still have troubles, but Giannis, he struggled. He wasn't fantastic. He turned the ball over. He didn't shoot well from the free throw line. He wasn't his dominant self. But when you've got Chris Middleton giving you 13 a game, don't think I'm disrespecting Middleton. I really like Middleton. I think he's an all-star level player, but he was not good in that series. Gave you 13 a game. Eric Bledsoe was shooting 29% in that series. It just wasn't really happening outside of Giannis. And then against the Miami Heat, again, eventual finalists, playing against elite defenders. One job, stop him. Middleton delivered in that series, but Giannis just wasn't great. It happens. He was on a sprained ankle, and the Heat were a good team with a lot of momentum. There you go. That's his 2 playoff series that he's struggled in, quote unquote, because he's still been pretty good. He just hasn't been superstar best player in the league. But that doesn't really matter when it comes to MVP voting, is what I'm trying to say. It's a different criteria. If you want to change the criteria, do that. But at the moment, what we've got to go off is someone who dominates in the regular season, helps his team win, and consistently performs on both ends of the floor. That's exactly what Giannis is doing. Again, all I'm saying is if he continues to put up 35 and 13 over the next 40 games and the Bucks end up as the number 1 seed, which is very, very plausible considering they're the 3rd seed right now and 2 games or so behind the Philadelphia 76ers, that's an MVP right there. So are you going to award him the MVP? That's what I want to get to in the end. If he ends up averaging 33 and 14 on the season and the Bucks are the number 1 seed, are you just going to bypass him because of the past or because he's won MVP before? Like, would that not be the dumbest thing? Just know Giannis is still performing, even though you probably haven't heard anything about him, which is probably good for the Bucks and team. It's just a little bit of added motivation. It allows him to get into form and hopefully pick it up in the playoffs, which I want to see him do. I want to see him perform in the playoffs, but it shouldn't be taking away from his case to be an MVP, because that's exactly what he has, and a very strong one at that. If you made it to the end of the video, it was more of a rant type of video, I know, but I just wanted to kind of rant about the whole situation with Giannis. Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day. I'll catch you next time.